Welcome. This is James Corbett of the Corbett Report with your EyeOpener report for BoilingFrogsPost.com. For years now, the drumbeat for war with Iran has been growing steadily louder from the Likudniks in Israel and their ideological bedmates in Washington. Weary, exhausted, and economically depleted after years of disastrous entanglements in the Middle East, it is hard to believe that the American public is eager for yet another conflict. Yet every few months, without fail, there are new signs that the Israeli leadership is sharpening their tools of warfare, and cries are raised in the corridors of power in Washington for unflinching vows of support for whatever action Tel Aviv decides to take. As we examined last week, this drumbeat has reached fever pitch yet again in the last few months, and now Washington insiders, think tanks, and policy wonks are once again openly discussing the possibility of staging a false flag event to blame on the Iranian enemy and justify a retaliatory strike. But what would the fallout of such an action be? Well, for starters, there would be literal fallout. Although almost never discussed, one consequence of any armed strike on a nuclear facility like the ones in the Iranian nuclear program is the potential release of radioactive materials into the atmosphere. At a fuel enriching plant like that at Natanz, or a research reactor like that at Isfahan, the risk is that bombings or other military strikes would cause the release of corrosive and poisonous chemicals including pure fluorine and uranium hexafluoride. These gases are lethal, but since they are heavy gases, they would not spread much beyond the immediate area of the plants themselves. A far greater concern would be a strike on the Bushehr nuclear power plant. As Mark Fitzpatrick of the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London told the Asia Times Online earlier this year, bombing Bushehr would be worse because the irradiated fuel would release radioactivity into the atmosphere. In a worst-case scenario, if all redundant cooling power systems were knocked offline, it could lead to a Fukushima-style meltdown in the reactor. But the facilities aren't the only concern in the event of a military strike on Iran. At issue also is what type of weapons might be used against Iran in such a campaign. For years now, the United States has been trying to legitimize the use of first-strike nuclear weapons by deeming them as tactical weapons. As long ago as 2005, the Union of Concerned Scientists was warning of proposed nuclear bunker busters that the US has intimated could be used in a strike of underground Iranian facilities.
The US wants to develop a new type of nuclear weapon, a nuclear earth penetrator or bunker buster. This nuclear bomb, intended to destroy underground targets, would be useless against many bunkers. At the same time, it would produce massive amounts of radioactive fallout and potentially kill millions of civilians. The nuclear bomb, dropped by an airplane, would only penetrate a few meters into the ground, too shallow to contain the nuclear blast or the large cloud of radioactive fallout. The nuclear radiation could spread more than 1,000 miles. If the United States used a single weapon with a 1 megaton yield against the Isfahan nuclear facility in Iran, for example, the deadly radioactive fallout would spread to Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India. In this simulation, based on a model developed by the Pentagon, over 3 million people would be killed as a result of the attack, and 35 million people would be exposed to significant cancer-causing radiation.
Assuming there was an identifiable region left to inhabit in the wake of such a strike, what would the next stage of such an action be? As expert after expert has been warning for years now, the almost inevitable result would be to draw in some of the largest military powers in the world in what could be the largest conflict in human history.
We are evolving towards an integrated Middle East war theater, Middle East Central Asian war theater, where military initiatives have been taken by the United States and its allies in Pakistan, Iran through covert operations, and Syria through the process of regime change, which is ongoing, but which also consists in supporting insurgent groups within that country and ultimately destabilizing the regime. What must be understood is that all these military as well as covert initiatives are centralized. They're part of a single military agenda. They're not separate initiatives, and they're not separate war theaters. So that when we look at Pakistan, Iran, Syria, and bearing in mind that we already have several war theaters which are active within that region, namely Afghanistan, Iraq, and Palestine, of a somewhat different nature, what we get is an extended war theater from the Eastern Mediterranean right through to the Chinese border. All these countries have common borders. Syria has a border with Iraq. Iraq has a border with Iran. Pakistan has borders with Iran and Afghanistan. So that essentially what is likely to occur if a new military initiative is launched is that that whole region will flare up from the Eastern Mediterranean right through to the Chinese border. And I should mention that China and Russia are part of this equation. We are at a very dangerous crossroads. The United States and its allies are waging wars in different parts of the world. They're using sophisticated weapon systems, covert operations, regime change. These are weapons of the 21st century. They contemplate the use of nuclear weapons, ironically against Iran, which does not possess nuclear weapons. These are tactical nuclear weapons which have an explosive capacity between 1/3 and 6 times the Hiroshima bomb, and they are classified, and they have been classified as safe for the surrounding civilian population by the Senate and can be used in the conventional war theater. This is a World War III scenario.
Well, I fear that you're correct, but for the life of me, I cannot understand what the purpose behind this would be at this time, not only with the collapsing economy that would make such a strike economic suicide, but the fact that Iran has such a capability to strike back, much more so than Iraq ever did. And I can't see how any plan would not take that into account. So what is the real strategy here, and what is the purpose of this rhetoric?
Well, it has multiple purposes. We have the neoconservative ideology that is implanted in the United States government, and this is an ideology of world hegemony, that is, to dominate the world. Now, Iran is the last remaining independent country in the Middle East. We could say, well, maybe Syria, but they're sort of boxed in. The rest of them are either occupied by the United States or are under the control of American puppet governments, like Egypt, for example, which is just another puppet state of the United States. And so this is part of extending the hegemony, clearing out the Middle East of any independent governments that represent their own people as opposed to American interest. So that's one part of it. Another part of it is Israel. Israel wants to be able to completely dominate the Middle East. It wants to finish the expelling Palestinians from the West Bank. It wants to grab southern Lebanon because of the water resources. And yet what stands in its way is Hezbollah. And the Israelis know that Hezbollah is supported by Iran, and so if we can get rid of Iran, then Israel doesn't have to be worried about being defeated a third time when it invades southern Lebanon. And without Iran, there's no support whatsoever for Hamas, and so they can finish starving the Palestinians in Gaza and finish expelling the Palestinians from the rest of the West Bank. So that is another part of it. So we have those are two big parts. And then the third part is just the American military security complex. It needs wars for its profits. And the United States government is all in favor of these wars and profits because money gets recycled back in political contributions. So for the United States government, war is a way of recycling taxpayers' money through the military security complex back into political campaigns. And of course, the fourth part is the prostitute U.S. media. This media serves as a propaganda ministry for all of these deceptions. There's no honest reporting in any of the American print or TV media. And so you have there the four pieces of the picture. And this, of course, serves the media because it's entertainment for Americans. Oh, we're kicking somebody else's butt, you know. We're the great macho power. We're on the march here and there and so on. So it's a form of entertainment, helps their advertising revenues, keeps them in the government's good stead, so all the broadcast licenses are renewed. And there you have the picture. That is why it's happening. It is not happening because Iran represents any kind of a threat.
The economic fallout from a strike on Iran has the potential to be no less deadly in the long run, if somewhat less spectacular. Given the precarious nature of the global economy as it is not difficult to imagine how even a small, contained conflict in the Middle East, could that even be conceived, may be the very thing to send the global financial system teetering over the precipice.
It's turmoil in the Arab world that's now threatening a bigger blow to the global economy than the crisis in the Eurozone. IMF chief Christine Lagarde has warned that escalation of the situation with Iran, for example, could drive oil prices above $160 a barrel. Let's get more on all this with RT's Peter Oliver. So what else has Lagarde been warning?
Well, she said that we could see a potential 30% spike in the price of oil. Now, to put that into dollars and cents, that would see the price of a barrel of Brent crude jump to $160 from the level of $125 where we see it at the moment. Now, she's saying that this could happen if Iran was to cause problems with the distribution of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if that was to happen, then, well, Iran, the second largest oil producer in the world, that would cause big problems.
In many ways, we have reached a point in the development of our civilization where the future survival of the human race is predicated on our ability to avoid conflicts of the very sort that are currently being mulled in the proposed attack on Iran. In terms of physical weaponry and economic instability, we are in no position to face the scale of calamity that could be unleashed by an Iranian war. Still, the politicians with their itchy trigger fingers and the think tanks and talking heads that justify their actions would have us believe that an attack on Iran would be a mere cakewalk and, just like Iraq or Afghanistan or any of the other conflicts in the preceding century of bloodshed, we would be greeted as liberators by those whom we seek to blow up. For those Americans who can see beyond these infantile delusions, it's an uphill battle to convince others of the urgency of this issue. After all, there is a presidential election race underway. One can only hope that when that race is decided one way or another, enough citizens who can see beyond the red-blue political charade can be energized to make a strong, viable anti-war opposition the cultural force that it has been in times past. The fallout, should the world fail in such an endeavor, may be too ghastly to contemplate. This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information on this and other topics, please go to BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information and commentary from James Corbett, please go to CorbettReport.com.